Welcome to Season 3 of the Strange, Rare, and Peculiar podcast, a place where we explore the past, present, and future of homeopathy from the perspective of a couple of insiders who have been around the homeo block a couple of times.
Homeo block? All right. Good morning, and good afternoon, and good evening.
And all the places, things, and times.
And everything in between.
And tea.
And tea.
Naughty Vicar.
We are, we're kind of deep into our cup of tea, actually.
Yes.
And it's delicious.
It is so good. And we learned that the London tea merchant, they have another vicar. They have the Canadian vicar, who's the maple companion. Kelly Webb, who has taken on, she's one of our students. She's amazing. And she is also now into this tea. So, yeah, I'm going to have to try it. You're not a maple fan.
I don't think I can do the Canadian vicar.
No. Which is probably a wise choice.
Let's just leave it there. What have you been doing this week?
A lot of teaching. A lot of teaching. It's the beginning of our new semester.
All right.
It's funny that the semester starts at the end of January and students have been back since the holiday.
I know, because we said that a couple of weeks ago. Hey, we're back.
We're back.
But it was just back from a break.
Back from a break, and then now is new semester, which means that there are some new students who joined us for semester 4. Wow. But
semester 2 is really the place.
Oh my gosh.
Right.
I love semester 2.
So what's the difference between 1 and then 2? Is it just a progression, or is there a hard stop? What makes it different?
Everything. Everything. Because semester 2 is where we start talking about chronic diseases. Not just start talking about it.
The thorny topic.
It's not thorny.
Oh, it is thorns.
It's elegant simplicity. Where are the thorns? What are the thorns?
So if we talk about the chronic diseases, am I allowed to interject with pithy, questionable remarks?
Or let me try and stop you.
All right.
What are your pithy, questionable remarks?
About the simplicity of Hahnemann's theory of chronic disease.
Well, I think what are you doing there?
Scratching my beard.
Oh, maybe not. This is why we're not on video, people.
Sorry.
Well, it's okay. It's totally fine. I think that the part that could make it thorny is that there have been too many attempts to take this incredible perspective and create a two-dimensional, set of columned symptoms for solving problems, and it just doesn't work that way.
Okay.
I'm not a fan of the columns.
Speaking about the columns, what do you mean?
You explain the columns.
Well, there are some textbooks, folks, that have long lists of symptoms. Well, the chronic diseases part 2 being the first of them.
Yeah, but...
Which is where there's a long list of human symptoms that are categorized as psoric.
Exactly.
And then there's a few other textbooks like Curler and one of the Banerjee's books on miasmatic theory that have a long list, pages and pages of lists of symptoms that are seen as predominantly syphilitic or psychotic.
But it doesn't take it. I mean, it's overly simplistic. And if you read it the way that it is in Hahnemann's, in part 1 of chronic diseases, it's not in part 1. Part 2 is the materia medica.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Oh, I thought you said part 2. Anyway, in part 1 of chronic diseases, Hahnemann lists all these symptoms, but he's showing the purpose of the list of symptoms is to show how, especially when it comes to psora, how deep and varied the symptoms are. And he paints a picture of how that can present itself. And I think there are ways that it's sort of by way of comparison, right? So syphilis and psychosis are clearly different. I mean, I don't want to get into the weeds here because...
Yeah, take a step back.
Yeah.
How because I thought, semester 1, I thought homeopathy is simple, right? We apply the principle of similars.
Sure.
There's a bunch of provings that are pretty good. We understand our medicines, and therefore our job is to understand what's going on in the client and do a bit of pattern matching.
Right.
And that's the job.
No, well, that's the beginning of, okay, let's look at aphorism 3 then, because aphorism 3 is the job description of the homeopath, right? Paraphrasing, Hahnemann says, aphorism 3, know what is curative in medicines, know what needs to be cured in the patient, apply according to principles, and remove the obstacles. So 3 and 4 are really important because, so if we talk about this through the lens of the arc of the curriculum that we've developed, it's really based on Hahnemann's journey, starting with, everything being equal, right?
So did he have a motorbike accident?
Did Hahnemann have a motorbike? No, he had a carriage accident.
Well, see, it's important because somewhere in 1816, right, he clearly went, just like Bob Dylan, 1966.
Oh, that's where you're going with this, right? I mean, it makes total sense now.
The motorbike accident.
Sure.
Have you ever wondered why he sounded the way he did in all the early albums? And then he comes out in 1967 with Nashville Skyline, and he sounds like a choir boy.
Oh, the opposite of what one would expect, because Joni Mitchell starts out like a choir girl, and then she smokes like 3 packs of Camels a day, and by the time she gets to, the hissings of summer lawns, she's got this gravelly voice.
She sure does.
And she never should have been asked to open for Bob Dylan.
Okay, let's leave it. All right.
I'm sorry.
That's a mistake. I shouldn't have gone there. But what I'm saying is that historically...
That was 1998
homeopathy
in Madison Square Garden. Just saying. I was there.
All right. So homeopathy starts for the first decades with the application of similars.
One remedy at a time.
And then...
largest totality of symptoms according to similars in the minimum dose.
And then at some point he's just starting to go, why are they coming back?
Because they were relapsing. Back? Exactly. That's 1816.
Right.
And if you think about all the accomplishments he had by 1816, right? He's already understanding the treatment of epidemics, the idea of collective disease. He's already looking at things prophylactically. How can one preempt, an epidemic by way of giving the indicated remedy from the genus and all of that.
He's got a bunch of kids.
He's got a bunch of kids. Yeah.
All of his achievements.
Yep.
And he then goes upstairs. Have I told you my story?
Which story? You told me a lot of stories.
Well, in my screenplay of how chronic disease.
Oh, yeah.
Right. Anyway, because I think we've probably talked about it on the podcast before.
I don't know, but let's just give us a little.
He's upstairs in the bath, and 1815, he's 60, right? So 61 years old. He's in the bath.
Yeah.
And he's a sulfur type, and he doesn't spend a lot of time in the bath because anyway. And so,
do you think that changed when he got himself a young wife? Like in his cougar years, he started to shower more or bathe more. Just saying.
I don't think. Oh, that's controversial.
What?
Well, because the French.
Oh, don't go there.
Well, I'm just wondering about the hygiene practices of the French and the Germans and the English in the 1800s, and I don't think it'd be too flash. The sound of the engine is the cat that's trying to eat the microphone.
Hildegard of Bingen, she comes every single time from wherever
anyway, the point is, he's in the bath, and he says, honey, I've worked it out. And he runs down the stairs, bollock naked, and he says, there's only 3 diseases on the planet.
Yep.
And that every symptom you've ever had, every disease name,
that's right,
every symptom that could possibly be conceived can be pigeonholed into 3 pigeonholes.
That's right.
And that's it. End of story. And is that the simplicity you're talking about?
No, not at all.
All right. Because I think that's the problem that a lot of commentators have had about the disease.
Think the disease. Oh, about chronic diseases. Think about it, because he went to his best buddy, Staff and Gross, right? 1828, right? Well, this was probably 1827, before Chronic Diseases is published, and he calls them together and he says, hey guys. They're smoking cigars, right? They're out on the town, shooting some dice. And
I got this new theory.
More tea, and he says, I got to tell you, I cracked it. I cracked the code, and he explains it to them. And they just make this sound. They don't do it. Don't do it. They already think you're bananas. And now you're going to add this, right? They're going to lock you up and throw away the key.
Exactly.
Right, because it's moving away from where medicine is headed. He's moving in the opposite direction. Oh. Right?
Yeah, go for it.
And so he sees it so incredibly clearly. And honestly, I think we are coming round to that now, right? With autoimmunity. You know, when I started to look at autoimmunity as a part of my research in looking at sort of the origins of understanding of autoimmunity, which basically only goes back to, you know, really around the 1970s with, and I can't remember the date, but it was thought up until that point that the human body would not attack itself. And then with the discovery of Hashimoto's thyroiditis, it was shown that actually that is a possibility, and it sort of went from there. Now, one could argue that the, you know, giving names to all of these diseases is because we now understand their process and yada yada. But when you really look at the ways in which people are diagnosed with autoimmune diseases, you know, if you have one autoimmune disease, you are 50% more likely to have a second one. And a lot of autoimmune diseases are diseases of sort of, well, kind of like the checklist we were talking about. If you have a certain number of symptoms, then you get your, you know, stamp of lupus, or you get your whatever, right? And so many of these diseases go together. I mean, so many of the clients I see who have lupus also have Sjogren's, right? You look at rheumatoid arthritis, and then you look at...
Can I ask you a question out of
Sure.
interest?
Yeah.
And are they present in the body at the same time, or are they historically followed one another?
No, they're present in the body at the same time.
Oh, that's interesting. So there's two similar diseases?
Well, it's not two similar diseases. That's the thing. It's
right.
psora.
Right. Well,
It's all the same disease.
Right.
It's all the same disease. So
manifesting in different ways.
Exactly. It's just a conglomeration of diseases. And so if you look at it and then you go, oh, well, with psora, wait, I lost my train of thought. Where was I going with that? Oh, that over time, sorry, there's so many things to talk about here, but, you know, over time, we're starting to see that the folks who are keeping track of what is autoimmune in nature. So, you know, last year I taught that 2-day shenanigan in Florida, right? And I presented for 2 solid days just on autoimmunity.
Brilliant seminar.
Oh, hey, thanks.
Oh.
I learned a lot in preparing it. It took me a year to put that together.
To it as well.
That's true. And it was amazing. Anyway, but the point I want to make is that this, in doing this research, I was going through and I was looking at sort of what is the perspective on different diseases. So, for example, is there a view that cancer is autoimmune? Turns out, yes. Asthma considered autoimmune. Allergies considered autoimmune. Depression, autoimmune. So I just started to just doing a simple, you know, Google search, like on different conditions, and then looking for, like doing Google Scholar search on and PubMed searches on whether or not there was, you know, anyone was studying autoimmunity related to different conditions. And I was like, geez, there's nothing left. And I thought, in a smug way, Hahnemann, of course, knew this. This is psora. So when you start to see, right, so autoimmunity is sort of is like the way that what we would call modern medicine is caught up to the idea of psora. Same thing. It's developed psora, right? And so... Live and active psora. And so when you start to see it that way, and you start to realize that chronic diseases is so prescient, right? That in 1828, so literally, you know, from 1828, 1928, 2028, we're 3 years away from the 200th anniversary of the publication of Chronic Diseases.
We'll have a party.
Oh, of course. I mean, heck yeah. So right. I think I might be the only person on the planet who's really thinking about that one. Right. Dress up as your favorite syphilitic, whatever. But no, but seriously, so what is prescient about it is not just that we've sort of now got a new name for it and it's like, oh yeah, right, everything old is new again. But also that Hahnemann, he understood the sort of ease with which a person can become sort of sick, what he would say the acquisition of a chronic disease, which is different. The word chronic, when we talk about it homeopathically versus allopathically, totally different, right? Chronic disease in the allopathic term is length of time. It's right. But in homeopathy, is it related to a miasmatic disease? And I don't want to go into that part because it's
It's
too in the weeds talking about miasms. But
no, but it's good to contextualize it.
Totally.
Oh, not only maybe for the folks, but for me as well, just to get back on the horse again. Because like there's many implications with what he's saying. He comes out of the bath and he says, "Hey, I've worked it out."
Yeah.
How has he done that? What he's done is
Does he wear a cap in the bath?
Yep.
Yeah.
He has taken all of his files out of his fireproof filing cabinets,
sure,
of which there are many.
He's been schlepping them around.
He's spread them all out on the floor, and he spent the 12 years,
almost 13
years, looking at cases, reflecting on the way that in this case, the disease rolled from that presenting complaint as a 20-year-old to that chronic disease as a 60-year-old, dying of that, the relationships between symptoms.
Yep.
And he's cracked the code.
But that's not how he cracked the code. That's just one part of it.
Well, exactly.
Because he changed the application of medicines. He changed the preparation of medicines, right? He went through a series of further refinements, which speaks to the fact that it's not just about symptoms. It's an entire, like he said, Hughes writes about the fact that with Hahnemann's discovery of chronic diseases, right? A new class of diseases for which an entirely new set of medicaments was required.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
it changed the substances that were being used in medicine.
That's correct.
How can I ask you a question?
Sure.
How do you get it?
How what?
How do you get it?
What do you mean? How do you get it?
Your chronic disease.
Oh, how does one acquire a chronic disease?
All right.
Sorry,
excuse me. Excuse me, darling.
Yes,
how might one acquire one's chronic disease?
Sorry, the way you were asking, like, how do you get it? I was like the concept? Like, how do you get the book? What are you talking about?
No, how do you get it? I'm just going about my business.
I mean,
I've got a chronic disease. Does it come in the window?
With Sora, I mean, as it's so easily transmitted that it's, when the midwife catches the baby. And so you can look at that literally, right? So the acquisition of a disease, but Hahnemann is really clear both about it being a dynamic disease, so transferred on the energetic plane, but he also was the father of germ theory, which we can... he understood miasma.
Millions
in a way,
of tiny animals.
They used to call them, well, not Hahnemann didn't, but what were they called? Animalcula?
So why did he choose that word?
Miasm?
I mean, of all of the words.
Right, because it is a word that has had so many implications. I think that he chose the word because a miasm, so even Shakespeare writes about this, that it has to do with the whole alchemical process. So when there is the decay of something, the putrefaction of something, new life comes. So maggots, right? Maggots are part of this process. Maggots are considered a miasma. They're like the little bugs associated with disease.
Yes,
right?
I agree.
Okay. So if you think about it, it's that process.
But the word at the time meant the emanations that come out of the swamp.
Yeah, pollution, swamp.
Not pollution. That's the ancient Greek.
Yes, but Hahnemann, as a scholar of many languages...
Yeah, okay, but the point I'm saying is that at the time...
Right, he could have chosen a different word.
He could have chosen a different word. He chose a word that was used in his time in his language, meaning, those swampy districts down there. And the word had meant, in Greek, pollution, stain, all of that stuff. And of all of the words, I'm just not quite so sure, because he writes quite specifically and clearly that his definition of a miasm is an infectious cause of disease.
He does, but he so this is where...
What gives?
Oh, I'm thinking about how to say this without going too deep into something. So
I thought you were wondering about which hand you were going to whack me around the top of my head with.
Well, no, because I have a bum hand, so I only have one I can use.
Have you told the folks?
Not on the podcast. I don't think we've recorded since I busted up my finger.
She's got this gammy finger, but let's turn it into a learning pedagogy.
Okay, can we do that later? Let's just... It doesn't sound my gesticulating or my talking, so that's fine.
All right.
No, but I think you make a really good point. Remember when I was coming up with my dissertation topics, and one of them was I wanted to either trace the legend of miasma all the way through, or Mercury.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. but instead went with a similar, actually a topic similar to both of those things, which is the, convergent evolution of homeopathy and biomedicine, which was a great learning experience. Now, all that being said, I think you're correct. Not correct, but I think you're asking a really interesting question about why did he choose that word? Yeah. We've talked about this so many times, and I really think that it covers a lot of bases, and it can be interpreted in many ways. So to Hahnemann, disease, there is the acquired infectious miasm, right? This is, Hahnemann is really clear about sort of how diseases are transmitted, right? I mean, and think about in lesser writings, when he wrote it was like a riff on Hippocrates, on epidemics, right? When he writes about if there's a household with people who are known to be sick, walk on the other side of the street, burn the hay in the prisons where people are, have been sleeping and others are infected, right? Get rid of the blankets and all of that. So he definitely understood very clearly transmission of disease. I think he also, and I know that this is a controversial topic about sort of what we would now call, inherited disease or epigenetics, right?
Exactly.
It's definitely a controversial thing. But if that's the case, I mean, think about when Hahnemann says, treat the pregnant woman to make the baby healthier. Mm-hmm. Give the remedy to the mother through the breast, to the baby through the breast milk, or through, well, actually that kind of kills the theory or through the wet nurse, which is different than that.
That's an interesting one, isn't it?
Yeah.
But you see, one of the, because I'm mostly fine with the theory of chronic disease. I love the way it explains why the removal of obstacles to cure and living well and giving up wine and limiting your coffee to 1 a day, and decaf, and and just attention to one's regimen gets you so far. It takes you towards the top of what you're capable of.
Yep.
I would say genetically, but it explains therefore the difference between naturopathy and homeopathy.
Right.
The difference between those natural therapies that deal with the symptoms of what we would call pseudo-chronic disease or artificial chronic disease, mm-hmm. and the difference between that and the chronic disease. So I think that it explains that magnificently. I don't think it explains, there's a part of it which has always been awkward for me, and it is firstly, how do you get it and how do you pass it on? And what is and I know that there's a sort of more scholarly conversation around this word. Is it Erbschaft? Have you heard that conversation?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the definition of that. See, by the time that Kent starts writing about chronic disease theory, you head into the sins of the father.
Right.
Where you're in the Garden of Eden. And suddenly it just becomes mystical and mythical. But
I wouldn't throw all of that out. And you know that how I feel about Kemp. But remember, so I've been trying to avoid going down this road, but I know. But it's all about the intentionality. Because, Hahnemann didn't just go up into the bath and then get out with, get his cases out and put things into the right category, right? He changed the medicines. He changed the production. Right? And then shortly thereafter introduced a completely new mathematical, way of producing remedies. These things have to all be taken together.
Okay.
They're all part of the same discovery. And so the discovery, I think, not the discovery, but the explanation, it has to be seen through what is so this goes back to the aphorism 1 idea, the highest ideal, right? The highest ideal is, and if you look at aphorism 1 with the footnote, which is all about don't fall for these systems that are not true systems of healing, Hahnemann, he cracked the code, right? And cracking the code is, how do we put life back into an organism, otherwise losing life? Mm-hmm. And so as a medical alchemist, as a polymath, as a person who studied, going all the way back, I was able to trace the crossover between things Hahnemann directly included in his medicine back to 8th century Persia. So what were all of those people looking for? What is the context of that? And that's why I went to the maggots.
Okay.
Because if you think about it, if it's so the whole in the 7 systems that are a part of the alchemical process, right? The goal is the creation of it's the achievement of eternal life. Okay. And so one of the things that happen, the whole story of the homunculus, right? Paracelsus and the homunculus, or what do you call it? The golem, right? It's the creation of life, right? And so in Hahnemann's time, there was not just the beginning of the quest to isolate disease, as happened in the 19th century, but was about the generation of life. So you have putrefaction is
regeneration, or the generation.
Both generation and regeneration. So and so those are all part of the same thing, right? So the idea of the creation of the what do you call it in the I can't think of the term. Anyway, it'll come to me. But basically, the creation of life from no life was a big part of it, or putting life back into something. It's all about the key to eternal life. And Aphorism 9 sort of gives us the idea of how we as incarnate human beings, that is the goal for us, right? To achieve our soul's highest potential, basically. So Hahnemann is taking all of these things and he's putting them through the filter of medicine, and medicine that he can make attainable to everyone. So he says in the Introduction to Chronic Diseases, I could have kept this for my own gain, but no, right? No, I'm going to give this to the world because this is what humanity needs, right? This is what we need. And so, this whole idea of follow me, but follow me well is you can't just, he says what is the essay where he says to not throw pearls before swine? And who said that originally?
Essay of a New Principle.
Essay of a New Principle, right? And isn't that a Platonic statement?
I don't know.
I'll look that up. But anyway, this idea though is you don't just give you don't just take
throw the spanner at the pigeons.
Exactly. Or, homeopathy is so much more than I'm going to take a protocol class and I'm going to learn how to give these medicines to shut up the vital force. No, this is all part of this way in which we have to, through clear investigation, just like Hahnemann did, understand how these principles are used. So when he's naming new medicines.
Yep.
Right? What are half of the new medicines that were introduced in chronic diseases? You've seen my presentation on this.
They're all minerals.
Yes, not all, but mostly. But what are 50% of the first tranche of new medicines are what?
Metals.
Carbons.
Oh,
carbons.
I see what you're saying.
Right. Beginning, so the foundational basis of life. So if you think about miasm and maggots and how life comes from this putrefaction process, right? Then you start to see why he started looking at remedies that he was setting things on fire, reducing it to a carbon state such that, right? Why did he burn a sea sponge, Spongia tosta? What would have you wake up with I was going to say something first.
The Amazon delivered him a sponge accidentally.
Right, and he was cold. He was in the bath, and he was trying to heat the water. He was trying to heat the water, and took his bath sponge.
Burning a sea sponge is very strange.
Well, no, not if you think about it through, first of all, who introduced Bodiaga into the Materia Medica. The old Materia Medica was Arnald de Villanova, a 17th century alchemist, right? So Hahnemann, in the beginning of chronic diseases, he's not just setting things on fire, right? He work in the carbon cycle, but introducing remedies like Carbo-Veg, Carbo-Animalis, right? Why? Why would you choose burnt animal matter, burnt vegetable matter? Anyway, that's where, I can't get into all of this, but that's where I think
See, you've got a perspective on Hahnemann and his origins that I've not heard anyone else write about. I've read, and not recently, but I've read pretty much every book there is on miasmatic theory or Hahnemann's theory of chronic diseases.
Me too.
And so the perspective you're bringing around that, when I say that, specifically that sort of medical alchemical piece, really, really helps. Now, what about, so the theory, so he says in those aphorisms in the 70s, there's artificial chronic disease, pseudo-chronic disease, and true chronic disease.
Sure.
And there's 3 types.
And when you say the 70s, you don't mean the 1870s.
No, I meant the
You don't
aphorism.
mean the 1770s, exactly.
Yeah.
The aphorisms. Yep.
And then he also says something really important. And then there's the combinations of those 3.
Yeah.
So in fact, in Hahnemann's structure,
Yeah.
there are 7 miasmatic possibilities.
Yeah.
And okay, so with that,
Yeah.
then there is a couple of questions which obviously Stapp and Gross and others would have asked him about, like, okay, get it. How do we use it? You know, how's this applicable? How's this changing what we do? Are we still using externalized signs and symptoms to choose our remedies?
Yes.
The answer-
However,
Go.
well, because it's all about totality. So
Aha.
It's all about understanding the
A
totality of
different
symptoms.
totality of symptoms.
Exactly, because, and this is the thing. So if you look at it from sort of the arc, this is what we started out by talking about the arc of our curriculum, going through Hahnemann's journey. He doesn't throw away the idea of acute interventions, right? They are real,
Right.
but he gets very clear about what they are and how to deal with them. And he talks about the acute exacerbation of chronic disease.
Aha.
And then he says, oh, and by the way, you got to live right, but you need to remove all of the things that could lead to the exacerbation of your disease. And it is when those are removed that the true chronic disease shows itself.
Now, is that why you're eating pancakes today with
Yeah.
yogurt, banana, and then some sort of savory...
So I had an accident with my breakfast this morning. It was sad because I made these delicious high-protein pumpkin pancakes, and they use oats and eggs. They're really, really good. I like anything pumpkin. I'm a PSL kind of gal. But I accidentally... So I'll happily share this recipe with anyone.
You put a sardine in the smoothie,
I put a sardine in my smoothie, basically. So I made these. This is one of my favorite, like, fall, winter breakfasts. These delicious high-protein pancakes. And then I put, like, this delicious coconut yogurt on. And I've got this, like, coconut Icelandic yogurt. So good. And then some fruit. And then I always have toasted, like, nuts and seeds that I use for toppings on things. And I accidentally picked the savory one that I would put on a salad. So I had, like, cumin and and turmeric and stuff on my pancakes.
Now, the accurately listening, observing listener might ask, why are they suddenly talking about that? And it's really interesting because that's actually what we were talking about in the kitchen.
Yeah.
Because, I don't know, folks, I don't even know how to begin to describe my life. But my life is basically the best meal that I've ever had, followed by the next one.
Oh my gosh.
Followed by the next one. Not the ones that I'm talking about when I make my own breakfast, which is generally peanut butter and butter. Or panettone.
With butter.
And butter.
During the holiday season. Yeah.
Oh, I'm going to have some panettone.
Panettone, a little butter.
butter.
I caught Al talking to himself one day. He walked in and he was muttering to himself about how he was going to toast his panettone and put butter on it. And I thought, oh, this is my life. Here we go.
Slippery slope. Yeah.
Slippery slope.
Anywho.
But thank you for that. That's lovely.
Well, no, the point, and so it's really important because I think people might, think about homeopathy, and I know that they do. They focus on the pill and they focus on the similes, and they forget about the regimen and they forget about the removal of obstacles.
Yep.
And I just think that that's something that you and I do pretty well. It's not that we don't have a glass of wine every now and again.
Right.
Right? It's that we don't have 20.
Right.
And we eat mostly vegetables and a little bit of protein.
Yep.
Depending on the flavor.
We just got a whole house water filtration system.
Oh my God.
My gosh, which costs as much as our house.
Oh.
But the toxicity in the world needs to be mitigated.
Now, relating that back to
Yep.
this stuff, because I think that's the kind of, I want to talk about this more and more, right? Because actually, I'm glad you said the filter, because that's a like, people might go, what are you talking about water filter for? Okay, that's a really good thing to detoxify and drink better water.
Right.
But what that's doing is removing a toxic load from the body, and it's introducing better regimen and the removal of an obstacle for the true chronic disease to express itself and make itself known.
That's right.
Now, most of the time, going back to Hahnemann's theory of chronic disease, most of the time, I still think it's the case, even in this toxic world, that SORA is the predominant disease that we see in our clients.
Oh, totally. I mean, if you think about it, because remember I did a survey, this is going back now more than 10 years ago, when the bowel nosode craze landed on the shores of America, and when people were selling kits of bowel nosodes, I can't even go down this road, how ridiculous the application of this was. It still is. People are still teaching it in ways for which it is not intended, right? I mean, I teach that as part of my lecture on autoimmune diseases, looking at truly where this came from, and, in Batch and the Patersons and so on and so forth, right? Okay. Yeah. But with all that, this idea that, I was started by saying that I started surveying people about bowel nosodes and todopathic and isopathic prescriptions. Do you remember that? That would have been like in, I don't know, maybe it was like 2013, 14, something like that.
Yeah.
Because there was so much of it happening, and I thought, the prescribers that I really respect around the world, I'm going to reach out to them and ask the question, how often are you prescribing in this way? How often do you need to give, whether it's a bowel nosode, which they are useful when they are indicated? How often are you giving a todopathic remedy? In other words, the potentized substance of a medicine, or, a vaccine, or whatever the case may be. How often are you prescribing isopathically, giving the same for same? And without fail, the prescribers that I respect the most all said the same thing. Yeah, when they're indicated, maybe once or twice a year.
For all those three things?
Yes, once or twice a year.
Yeah, for me, the bowel nosodes and the todopathics would be once every 5 years, and the isopathic would be twice or 3 times a year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's not a no. It's just not the leading indicator.
Right.
Right? And yet that is where homeopathy has gone.
So do you see, though, that there's a bit of logic behind it, even though the application is kind of crazy, because what we've just said, what I believe in my heart of hearts,
in your heart of hearts,
is that is that we need to remove obstacles before the true chronic disease will emerge. Well, therefore, is not the removal of toxins from the body a legitimate starting point?
No, it makes total sense. Except that when you're doing it with homeopathic remedies, I mean, students asked me this week, about, what are the cases where, like, what is truly a case that can be resolved? When do we see cases that can't, and so on and so forth? And this, I mean, the research office is looking at this phenomenon now of overprescribing. And I know I'm like beating a dead horse around this, but we see a lot of cases through the AHE clinic and HHN and our supervision, all of the folks in supervision, like 500 to 600 chronic cases a year in our clinic and with supervision, not counting our own practices.
Yep.
Right? Plus all of the acute cases we see. So we have, and that's like well over 1,000. That could be 1,500 cases in a year, acute cases. So you add that together, it's over 2,000 cases a year, sort of in-house, right? So we've got a lot of data to evaluate what is happening and what is changing. And I would say without any hesitation that the cases that have been treated in that way, of all this detox business, and all those nosodes and all of that, they are exponentially harder to resolve than the cases that have not. And we're seeing that, not just, it's not just like one person seeing it. This is in a large group. Now, I don't want to say that to scare people, but it's just not a part, like, if you go back to the beginning, we're talking about intention and all that Hahnemann did to make this discovery, to truly understand the nature of disease and cure based on the laws of the universe and how to apply them. That was not a part of it. Look at the footnote to aphorism 56. He's like, no, right? And there's no early evidence of what happens when people take a gazillion remedies. Anyway, we don't have to keep going down there, but
we are. It'll be interesting to see what we come up with that particular research project. I got a question for you.
Yeah.
So, hang on, I lost it. There's a theory. Is it Lavoisier?
Lavoisier.
Killed in the French Revolution.
Oh, that's right. He was. Yep.
But greatest chemist of the day. Now, there's a theory that I've read about usually because I teach a little bit about the history of medicine, and so every now and again, somewhere is this really interesting theory about what you said before about the
spontaneous generation. Yeah, that was a huge part of the evolution of medicine and science.
So tell me about. I just want to know a bit more about it. Because there's obviously science moved on from that for obvious reasons, but science obviously moves on sometimes.
It didn't. Think about all the ways that there were permutations of that went on, right? So at that time, the development of the microscope, right, is the ability to be able to look at things and see not just patterns, but to see these, what were then called animalcules, right? What are these little creatures that are living inside of things? So then comes, then comes this idea of isolation of causative agents.
Right.
Right? So that was what.
Oh, I see.
So it led to that. But then there was also this other thing that's really quite interesting that I think is another sort of fly in the ointment around, if we're going to use the maggot analogy, let's keep it going. Another fly in the ointment about sort of nosodes is there was the same question evolving in medicine, and actually Constantine Herring was involved in this conversation. If you're going to take if you're creating a biological agent as a medicine of a disease, right? What is the most virulent aspect of the disease, and do they differ?
This is a very important question, folks, who are thinking isopathic thoughts in the 21st century, because this one was done and dusted in science in 1840.
Yeah, most of these have been done and dusted, right?
Know.
I mean, but
I know.
But which part?
So is it the tubercular material of the cow? Is it the tubercular material of the human? Is it the cough?
Is it the sputum? Is it the pus?
Is it the tears of the virgin?
Oh, well, we could talk about that in a second, Samuel Swan. But before we get to that, because that's the fun part that I want to talk about today. But
just say it again. Because this is so important.
Yeah,
if you're trying to capture a disease product,
right? What part of the disease product holds the energy that is the curative part of it? So this question arose throughout the 19th century. Is it, if you're looking at, say, measles, is it the blood? Is it the exudate from the lesion, from the pox?
Yeah. Right.
Is it? Is it just taking something from the skin?
Is it the blood of the person that's got it?
Exactly.
Oh my Lord.
So this is a really big question. And if you think about it, so if people are going like, well, it doesn't matter, it's all the same thing. Well, what if if you come from the herbal tradition, do you take the whole plant and crush? Do you take the roots? Do you take the leaves? Jeremy Sher did a whole thing on bark last year. Oh, you would say Bach. How do you say it?
Australian or New Zealand?
New Zealand.
If I'm New Zealand, I'd say Burke.
Oh, right.
And if I was Australian, I'd say bark.
And I'd say from Philly, bark.
But
bark. It was really interesting to look at different parts of a plant, of a tree, of whatever. And he did a thing on different, bark. And it's really important, right? When you're thinking about, it's like one thing if you're talking about it theoretically, it's another thing if you're dealing with a sick child.
Yeah, right.
Like, do you just guess? Do you know where these medicines are coming from? What's the chain of custody? I like to tell the story about Constantine Herring and the introduction of Serinum, right? So he got the material from which the remedy Serinum was originally made in 1830. Well, where was he in 1830?
He was in Suriname.
He was in Suriname, and he said he got the remedy from, and I'm quoting here, an otherwise healthy Negro, end quote. Mm-hmm. So what assumption would you make about that person? They were very likely enslaved. So we got a bioethic issue going on, right? But you also, when he describes what those lesions were, it doesn't sound like scabies, right? And so he's got this material in 1830 that may or may not have been scabies, and then he does further studies on it in 1856 to find the sulfocyanides in that material. Well, how did he carry that material around from 1830 to 1856?
In a little jar.
In a little jar. So like in like a Vaseline jar, in a, you know, like what kind of jar? Left over from some anchovies? Does he have it refrigerated? Like how long does pus last? Do you know what I'm saying?
I know exactly what you're saying.
So for me, I mean, I'm an old-fashioned Italian lady. I just think that we need to ask these questions. So when if we go back to what we're teaching, right? So we're like having these discussions with our students about chronic diseases, right? And if you're going to talk about the root of all diseases, you also have to talk about how others have interpreted that over time, herring being one of them, right? I mean, why did he call his remedy Sorinum in 1830? Well, if Chronic Diseases was published in 1828, and 2 years later, he thinks he's found a psoric workaround.
Do you think that remedy Sorinum we should just throw it away and start again?
I don't, but I don't think we should fool ourselves. Well,
So
actually, we have to look at it from two perspectives.
If you're looking at the disease of psora,
this is the thing.
Then back to your question.
Right.
What part of the condition, disease, product, discharge, whatever, should we be collecting the remedy from? And what the hell have the pharmacies been doing for the last 200 years? So this is the thing,
because if somebody is making it from legit scabies and then you're comparing it to the original material that may or may not have been, so anyway.
See, we know, for example, tuberculinum, the substance that we buy over the counter is from the Boracay Tafel stock from the...
That probably lived in the cabinet that's in my office at some point.
Yeah. But from, I'm going to say, which is at least 100 years old.
Yeah.
And so, new stock.
Yeah. So that's just, these are,
Yeah.
These are things we...
Interesting question.
Interesting questions. And so, what's the point? The point is critical thinking. The point is critical thinking. And what are you being taught? Like if you're, and so not to make this into some sort of a, commercial about a school, but like, I just think that we owe it to ourselves and to medicine to have critically thought through conversations and not just, made up things.
I think we owe it to our listeners to talk about the Tears of the Virgin because they might be somewhat concerned about that reference. Okay.
So, the thing is, if we're going to talk about, these medicines, nosodes and so forth, then we have to think about, well, who was introducing them, right? How did they make their way into, hold on here. I'm looking for my page. How did they make it into the Materia Medica? And so one of the people who was sort of the nosode aficionado was Samuel Swan. And so he lived from 1814 to 1893. And he studied at the Hahnemann Medical College here in Philadelphia. Yeah. And and there's not a lot about him. So if anybody has more information about Samuel Swan, please send it my way.
Interesting.
Yeah. So he was really interested in the use of morbific products, right? And he was responsible for lots of the nosodes that are still in use today. But there are two things to know about him. One is that he wasn't a big fan of provings because he said that you don't need to prove these medicines because we already have all of the information by way of the clinical data.
Ridiculous.
Well, it throws out the aphorism 153 idea, doesn't it?
Sure
the
does.
Strange, rare, and peculiar are the most characteristic symptoms. Anyway, but it's just fun as we're wrapping up to talk about the remedies. Right, you're just getting started. So he, these are some of the remedies that he proved. Okay, so he proved an Acrocordon chococ, a South American serpent, bell pole, belladonna, and pulsatilla as a combo.
What?
Yeah. Butyracum, buttermilk.
Wow.
Cachardon rondelletti, Chinese shark oil. Cogwheel columbiana, uncontrollable. Oh, he doesn't actually say what this is, but he does give a clinical indication, which is uncontrollable desire for coitus. Really? Yeah, I'm just reading this out of here. So, Cerulean iridase, Blu-ray of the spectrum. Anyway, and he goes on.
Blu-ray
Blu-ray of the spectrum.
Samuel Swan introduced Blu-ray.
blue ray of the spectrum.
Into homeopathy.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yep. But let's just, and Helios,
How
the
do you
sun.
get blue into a bottle?
Yeah. Well, Folio splendens, chimney soot, where hard wood has been burned. Yeah. Okay. So, but here's one. But there's also some really interesting ones.
He was dealing with a lot of chimney sweeps at that time.
Apparently he was. He proved mackerel.
Really?
Yeah. He
I
proved
think I
mackerel.
mackerel on a regular basis.
Here we go. This is the one I was looking for. Melito urcea, diabetic sugar. So probably from urine, from the urine in.
Absolutely.
Right? Pretty genius thought.
And he's thinking allopathic thoughts, but with a bent on using some of these substances in minimum dose.
Yeah, well, and he was clearly, because there are a bunch of things that he did that were related to diabetes, but there are two that are my favorites. Okay, so one of them is lacrimophilia, tears of a young girl in great grief and suffering. I love that. I just love the idea that he proved that. But then, that gets you to the idea of when you prove like human material. So if you've got disease product, you're assuming that is the product of the disease, not sort of what we would call in today's terms the genetic material of the individual, because you're sort of getting to like polyjuice potion at that point, right?
That's really interesting you said that, because isn't it the phoenix's tears?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I never thought of that. The tears.
Really?
Genius.
Oh my Lord.
I'm going to have to think about that all the rest of the day, at least until I start teaching clinic. Okay, here's one more. Seriaca barlowi, from a silk handkerchief eaten by a cow and taken from the stomach in a hard ball. During the 3 years she never had a calf.
Well, she never had a calf because she ate a ball, a silk scarf.
Yeah.
And then yes.
So this is the guy who also was proving, he was the person who introduced many of the animal milks, laccaninum, right?
And
lacphilinum and laccaninum. Oh.
And tuberculinum.
And tuberculinum. Right. Yeah. So.
And his tuberculinum was likely to be bacillinum.
I was just reading about this morning.
Because Kent Tubov came from Tubov Kent, right?
Yeah, now I'm confused because I was just reading about it this morning in Burnett.
Burnett introduced
bacillinum. Yeah, but Burnett and Clark had written to each other about tuberculinum. I didn't bring that book in here where we're recording. Anyway.
So hang on, let's just sum it up, and I know you've got to go. We're at 51 minutes. We're doing just fine.
Okay. And we have a little commercial at the end for an exciting thing that's upcoming.
Oh, yeah.
Two exciting things.
So we have been talking about, I suppose, the seriousness and the logic and the applicability of Hahnemann's theory of chronic disease. Where we ended up is a kind of a rambling conversation about isopathy and some of the weirder ends of it.
But we skipped the middle part, which which we're going to have to talk about, because the middle part, and where we had intended to go, was about how, we kind of got there, but we missed the chunky middle, which is how this idea of sort of the infectious principle got taken into a whole other arena.
Yeah.
And I know sometimes the term miasm is used shorthand to mean like a grouping or a category. Like, when Jeremy talks about the FARC miasm, like I sort of get that, but it's like it's an acronym, and it sort of leads us to a certain like fungi. Was it fungi, AIDS, radioactives, and cancer, right? So it's an acronym. It's a different, and he's using it to say a particular thing. So like if you understand where he's coming from, it makes total sense. Or if you look at how, Sankaran sort of changed our conversation about miasms when he introduced his, what was then called the sensation method, right? So at the beginning of his introduction of what was, in the 90s, a new idea, in order to make it work, it required the introduction of more categories of miasms, and also shifting the definition, a completely different. So when we talk about miasm, when we talk about chronic diseases, I think, it's totally fine that there are these other interpretations. And, I find it helpful to think about things in that FARC perspective. I like that. But to me, it lives in a different place in my brain than chronic disease theory, right? Which the unteasing of which I think could lead us to a greater and deeper understanding of what we do, which I love. You can never get tired of doing this.
What's your other announcement?
We're having a party, and everyone's invited. We are having, we've got.
Make plans.
This is a big year for us. This is the 10th year of Home Foundation and the 5th year of HHN, Homeopathy Help Now, the Homeopathy Help Network. And so we're going to celebrate. And so look for lots and lots of communication about this, but mark your calendars. So, every year we celebrate our graduates, and this year is no exception. We will be having our graduation party and in a beautiful location. It's going to be at the Waldorf School of Philadelphia. And it is an absolutely gorgeous church that has been sort of retrofitted now as a school to be a bit like Hogwarts. It's unbelievably beautiful. And then we'll have a party, and that is open to the whole community if you just want to celebrate homeopathy and welcome the newest members of the profession. You can join us for that. That's June 1st in Philadelphia. Then June 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, we are having a 3-day seminar/retreat. It'll be held here in Philadelphia at the Cope House and the Aubrey Arboretum. So it's in a beautiful spot. We're going to be in they have like an outdoor tent for weddings, it's not like a canvas tent like you'd see on MASH, but it's, like a beautiful, like clear, but
fancy tent.
It's a fancy, beautiful, beautiful space. And we will have a 3-day seminar there, and it's going to be really fun because we're incorporating community building. There's going to be fun things like the Great Homeopathy Nerd Out will be, in addition to some great learning. We're going to unpack potency and posology, do a deep dive into that. Alastair is going to teach some of his provings that, have you ever taught these provings in a big setting before?
I have. I'm going to say partially, and
Yeah.
the answer is no. Not the way that I'm going to do it this time.
I'm so excited.
Yeah.
What are some? Give us a little sample.
It's time to teach, and with some real depth, and with a bit of fun. The most poisonous creature on the planet.
I was hoping you'd say that, Chironex fleckeri.
Yay!
Yay!
Jellyfish. There's also a spider, white-tailed spider from a proving back in the day. There is the reprovings of Blatta orientalis.
Oh, that's cockroach. Yep.
Toad, bufo.
Oh.
Cactus. And
Cactus grandifolia.
Grandifolia.
Good.
And then a couple of other.
Are you going to talk about tuberculinum?
I am. Because that
Perfect.
is a great proving.
Yep.
From 2008.
So a new proving. So this is important based on what we were talking about. So that's a preview. So a 3-day seminar, and we will be helping out with lodging. There will be transportation from the lodging to the site where we will be having our teaching, and we'll have
pilgrimage to Herring's tomb.
Yep, we're gonna do some really fun outings. We'll go see Herring and Lippy's graves. Maybe we'll get a tour of the archives at Drexel. So we could see the Herring marker of where his house used to be. So Philadelphia is the birthplace of American homeopathy. So we're really going to do that, and then it all culminates on the 5th of June. We're having a gala. There's going to be music and dancing, and this gala is in support of Home Foundation. We just can't believe we made it to 10 years. So the gala supports our research office and the clinical initiatives. Who knows how many thousands of cases we will have seen by then at HHN. We've launched Comfort Care. So this is a way to really just bring the community in. So please, everyone is invited. It is, I think it's just going to be so much fun. The cutoff, the most we can have is 150 people. So we're asking, save the date, but let us know if you're coming so we can make sure that there's room for everybody. And if you are part of the Philadelphia or the tri-state area of homeopathy, we want to get all of the folks who go to study groups here involved in this. So I think it's going to be a really good time. It's going to be a big week, isn't it?
It's going to be enormous.
Enormous. So June 1st is the graduation. June 2nd, 3rd, and 4th is the retreat/seminar, and June 5th is the gala.
All right, folks.
It's going to be fun.
Calendars.
Yes. All right, everybody. Thanks for listening. Have a great week. See ya.
Early enrollment is underway at the Academy of Homeopathy Education. AHE is the first and only program in the U.S. to offer a full-time pathway. Enroll for fall 2025 by April 30th and save up to $500 on tuition. Contact admissions today at ahe.online. The Academy of Homeopathy Education provides various pathways through our program depending on your desired outcome. Our acute care homeopathy programs cater to students and medical professionals who aspire to use homeopathy in an acute care setting. We also offer introductory, professional, clinical training, and postgraduate programs. You can learn more at ahe.online